just Blenheim. I think you'll find it's the whole country. Just stop picking on Blenheim. So I thought that was quite funny.
Roundabouts are perfect in non-peak times, and peak times are really bad, and that's where traffic lights are better.
And they're really bad when it's like really busy one way but not the other, and then just sit there for ages waiting to turn.
One final tech-smart sort of question. Do we need to be IT leaders, apart from what we do in agriculture, which is very useful? What is our best future? In the long run, what will the world, do you think, prize us most for? Would it be being environmentally pure, not because we've started some tech hub up? What do you think?
I think that's a very big question. And I'm not really sure of the answer.
The people that visit, the tourists that come, and when I speak to them on the trams and stuff, I say, what's so good about New Zealand? They always say about the scenery and stuff. Yeah. But 99 times out of 100, they said it's the most friendly country we've ever been in.
Right.
That the people are really friendly and are really nice. Now, I tell you what, if New Zealand was known as that, I would be rapt, because there's nothing better than being that.
They don't often go, it's the tech innovation that's really brought me here as a tourist.
No.
Yeah.
It's friendly.
It's surprising.
Dairy New Zealand came out and said dairy farmers are tackling environmental issues head on. This was yesterday, and have made significant progress on their commitment to protecting waterways. And this is the Sustainable Dairying Water Accord 3 years on. 97% of dairy cattle fenced off from waterways on farms, and a distance equivalent to 12 trips by road from Cape Reinga to the Bluff. Not everyone is rejoicing. New Zealand waterways still suffering under the strain of dairy, says Forest and Bird. Not all farmers have got with the program. What about all the smaller streams where most of the pollution occurs? And speaking of which, just the last thing to talk about with you today, very high levels of E. coli, you may have seen this, have been found in the creek that runs into our most celebrated spring. Dairy farm runoff entering a subsidiary of Fish Creek. Fish Creek flows into New Zealand's largest freshwater springs in Golden Bay. It's happened before, Te Waikato Springs.
It just makes me furious.
Yeah.
Really furious. Like, it's like the farmers don't pay for the water that they use. It's something like, I was reading Jack Tame did a column, they use like 600,000 more times than the exported water that everyone's been so up in arms about people exporting our water. Farmers use this, they don't pay for it, and there just needs to be better ways of looking after our waterways. There's a guy, Sam Marn, I think he is, he's making a giant statue of Nick Smith defecating into a glass of water, which sort of sums it all up.
Charming. Levels as high as 20,000 E. coli per 100 mils discovered at the boundary where the creek runs into the reserve. So not necessarily in the springs yet. That's after testing by the Friends of Golden Bay. But would you expect, Barry, in this one place in New Zealand with the purest water of all, the clearest water in the Southern Hemisphere, we would guard it more fiercely than this?
Well, I would have hoped so. I mean, if we're told that 97% of all cows are fenced off from streams now, those other 3% are giant poopers. They really are. Because, we are having it all around the country, and it's very sad. And, we've got to keep the clean, green and pure thing. And I know it's very hard, and I feel for the farmers, because overall most farmers are environmentalists, because they've got to be to keep their businesses going, but some of them are letting us down.
Yeah, I mean, it's the runoff, isn't it? You don't have to be in the stream, you can be nearby, get nitrogen in the soil, and then it runs into the sea, does not? Into the rivers. I'm not sure much about it, but I just know that it needs to improve.
Very good. We're the friendliest people, says the text to Barry, until we get into our cars,
yes.
as once pointed out by Lonely Planet.
Oh my God, yes, we are assholes.
Very good.
Penny Ashton, thank you for being on the panel today. Good luck with the show. And Barry Corbett, always a pleasure.
Thanks a lot.
We're back tomorrow, everybody. Checkpoint now.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight, a woman who was raped by Malcolm Rewa a fortnight before Susan Burdett's murder speaks of her relief that police are seeking to retry Rewa for the murder of Susan Burdett. Also tonight, the White House denies an explosive media report that Donald Trump revealed highly classified information to the Russian foreign minister. Convicted fraudster Vicky Latelli died last night. Her family recalls the 6 months they shared with her since her compassionate release from prison. The government announces 34,000 new homes in Auckland. The Transport Ministry launches an investigation. Auckland University says it's had to ration food parcels because it can't meet the demand from cash-strapped students. And Jane Patterson on Labour's Māori caucus.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon, ko Katrina Batinaho. The police are seeking to retry the serial rapist Malcolm Rewa for the killing of Auckland woman Susan Burdett 25 years ago. Another man, Taina Porter, spent 22 years in prison after being convicted of Ms Burdett's murder, but his convictions were quashed in 2015. Laura Tupou reports.
Susan Burdett was raped and killed in her South Auckland home in 1992. Malcolm Rewa was tried twice for murder, but neither jury was able to reach a verdict. The Police Commissioner Mike Bush says after Mr Porter's convictions were quashed, the decision to stay the prosecution of Rewa was reviewed. He says the Solicitor General has now agreed to make an application to the High Court to retry him for the killing. The police have told Ms Burdett's family about the development, and Rewa has also been advised. Ko Laura Tupou aho.
But a lawyer who's previously represented Malcolm Rewa says there's no way he could get a fair trial. Barry Hart says Rewa has already been convicted by the press and the public. The Labour Party says National's plan to build houses in Auckland is not credible, given how long the government has been in denial about the housing crisis. More than 8,500 state houses will be demolished and replaced with 34,000 new houses over the next decade. 13,500 will be social houses, with the rest to be sold on the open market. But Labour's leader, Andrew Little, says it's just a drop in the bucket of what's needed.
This is an embarrassment, actually. I can understand why they've held this policy announcement over till Bill English was out of the country. If I was him, I'd have scarpered long ago. This is not a serious response to the housing crisis that we've got at the moment.
Andrew Little says a Labour government would build 100,000 affordable houses around the country over 10 years, half of them in Auckland. The New Zealand First Leader is calling for anyone who lost their job at the Transport Ministry after raising red flags about a convicted fraudster to be compensated. Joanne Harrison is behind bars for stealing nearly $750,000 from the ministry. In March, the Chief Executive, Peter Mercy, rejected Labour's call for an investigation into claims Harrison influenced a restructure to get rid of staff who raised concerns about her. He says since then, former staff have contacted him and an investigation has been launched. Winston Peters says anyone who lost their jobs unjustifiably are victims and should be compensated. Jobs could be on the line following a highly critical report of how the Ministry of Social Development stores client information. In March, the Ministry announced community groups such as Women's Refuge would have to hand over clients' personal data if they wish to get funding. Some data was stored in a temporary IT system, but this was shut down in April after a privacy breach in which one ministry contractor could see another's information. The review says the IT project lacked proper leadership and resourcing, and its security risks weren't properly checked. The Social Development Minister, Anne Tolley, says she's disappointed by the criticism, and the ministry is carrying out an employment investigation. Democratic leaders in the United States are demanding the president explain allegations he discussed classified intelligence with the Russian foreign minister and ambassador at the White House last week. The Washington Post reported Donald Trump jeopardized a critical source of intelligence relating to Islamic State. The Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal, who sits on the US Senate's Judiciary Committee, says the allegations are among the most serious ever levelled at a sitting US president.
This kind of serious and grave threat really requires a national response, putting country above politics. That's what I hope we'll be seeing. What needs to happen is for a full explanation from President Trump. He owes the American people an explanation.
Democrat Senator Richard Blumenthal. It's 5:04. To sport, and the Highlanders and All Blacks winger Waisake Naholo has been suspended for one match after being sent off in their Super Rugby win over the Bulls in Pretoria last weekend. Naholo was given a red card midway through the second half after a late shoulder charge. He'll miss the Highlanders match against the Western Force in Perth this weekend. Team New Zealand had a tough day on the water in America's Cup practice in Bermuda today, first breaking their rudder before nosediving the boat. They managed to repair the damage and return to the water for the afternoon session, but didn't take part in any races. The youngest ever New Zealand player to attend a World Cup has been named in an otherwise experienced White Ferns side for next month's Women's Cricket World Cup in England. At 16 years old, Amelia Kerr was just 2 months old when New Zealand last won the tournament in 2000. The The White Ferns coach, Heidi Tiffin, was part of that team and jokes she's old enough to be Amelia's mum, but says Kerr deserves her spot.
For a young player, she handles the pressure really well. She's very calm and collected. But at 16, she's played a lot of cricket in those 16 years and certainly puts herself out of her comfort zone in playing boys cricket, and she just provides something exciting for this World Cup campaign.
White Ferns coach Heidi Tiffin. The Nelson cyclist George Bennett has finished second in the second stage of the Tour of California and climbed to second overall. That's the news.
Is the suicide policy a cut and paste?
We're trying to go broader than previous strategies.
Who didn't delete the cyber virus?
There have been a few dozen people who have paid up, in totaling an amount of about $50,000 so far.
Students crash out on living costs.
Thank you so much for giving me this food. This is my only meal for the day. I've had to resign from my job because I have to study.
Log in or tune in. Morning Report on air and online weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, what developing technology will mean for the construction industry, 3D printed homes, increased use of robotic systems and virtual reality for training. Is it ready? And after 10, how Northland prisoners are getting in on the act for New Zealand Music Month. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow from Northland to North Taranaki, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taumaranui. Rain spreading eastwards later today and tomorrow morning with some heavy falls. Rain easing to a few showers from the west tomorrow afternoon and evening, northerly strengthening gale for a time. From South Taranaki to Wellington, also Taihape, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Cloud increasing today, rain spreading east tomorrow morning, then clearing from the west, apart from showers in Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast and Wellington. Northerly gales about the central high country tomorrow morning. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller and Westland, rain spreading east overnight with heavy falls in the north and west. Canterbury and Otago, cloud increasing with periods of rain tomorrow, mainly morning and evening. Southland and Fiordland, high cloud today, rain spreading north tomorrow. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with late rain tomorrow. It's 5:05 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Welcome, everyone. Coming up on the program tonight, Donald Trump and the Russians. The Washington Post broke the story, and we're joined by their congressional correspondent and their assistant editor. Also tonight, Vicky Latelli, who died last night, 6 months after her compassionate release. And Jane Patterson considers the position of the Māori MPs and Labour's caucus, plus the government's announcement about housing in Auckland. But first, the police are seeking to retry Malcolm Rewa for the murder of Auckland woman Susan Burdett. Rewa, a convicted serial rapist, was tried twice for the 1992 murder, but neither jury was able to reach a verdict. Taina Pora spent 21 years in jail for the killing before his convictions were overturned in 2015. The Police Commissioner, Mike Bush, says that the decision to stay the prosecution of Rewa was subsequently reviewed, and the Solicitor General has now agreed to apply to the High Court to have him retried. Rhonda McCarty was raped by Malcolm Rewa 2 weeks before Susan Burdett's murder in 1992. She'd withdrawn money from an ATM in the Auckland suburb of Parnell and got back into her car when she was hit violently and repeatedly on the back of her head with a blunt weapon. Rhonda told the police she pretended she was unconscious as she endured the attack, and she believed that probably saved her life. Speaking a short time ago, Rhonda told me that 25 years on, she's relieved about today's news.
I'm surprised because after what was said last year, I honestly thought it was a lost cause. I thought they'd given up, and I had basically come to the acceptance that it was probably never going to happen, so I had let it go. But now that we've got this news, firstly, I think phenomenal news for her family. I'm really, really, really happy for Susan Burdett's family. I think this is amazing for them. I think everybody that's spoken out about it over the last few years really needs to take some credit, because we've all played a part in bringing this to fruition.
And that includes you. And that includes you telling a story that not many victims of these sorts of crimes want to tell in public.
That's right. And I think, when I was thinking back recently, actually, it's been 25 years, and I was thinking, what's really changed in 25 years? And in terms of sexual abuse, sexual assault, rape, and really the only thing that's changed in our society is the fact that now more people are starting to talk about it, but it's just as prolific as it ever was. And I think the only way we're going to change anything is if we do start, having more of a conversation about it, and that requires more people to come forward and tell their story, and it has to start somewhere. So,
Rhonda, can I just back you up about a minute or so to what you were saying about the fact that you had given up on this, on the police taking this course of action? Why had you given up on it? Was it because you thought the police were reluctant to do this, or was it something else?
I think the reaction at the time was, well, we don't have that. They just were very cut and dry. We don't have any evidence. We're not going to do this. And I think I got the sense, like a lot of people, that Malcolm Rewa is in prison. He's probably never going to get out. Why go to the expense and the trouble of a trial? It's too much of a hassle. It's just not necessary. That was sort of the feeling that I got, like I think a lot of people got at the time. And it was just they didn't seem open-minded to even considering it last year. So I just didn't think that they ever would at that point.
And so this means something, doesn't it? It means something to you, because whilst, and I absolutely want to say on the record again, there have been no charges laid. This may not go ahead, and if it does go ahead, Malcolm Rewa has the right to a fair trial. But to somebody, Malcolm Rewa was found guilty of his terrible attack on you, and he is serving prison time for that. So, and as a victim of Rewa, this matters, doesn't it?
I think it matters to me personally, because at the time that I was attacked, I was quite sure he was capable of killing me. That's what I felt intuitively at the time, and I honestly believe my life was in danger. And so, for the police to be even open to retrying him for the murder of the woman that he raped 2 weeks after me is a really big deal, I think.
And it was only 2 weeks after you.
It was exactly 2 weeks later, 14 days. And, I can still remember when the police called me, it was back in 96, to tell me that they had caught my assailant and who he was, and that he was being charged with many other rapes. And when they mentioned to me that he was also being tried, this is the first time for Susan Burdett's rape and murder, and that was 2 weeks after my attack, it really did give me chills at the time when I heard that.
Can we, it's so rare for people who have been through what you've been through to want to be able to talk on the record about it. And so if I'm crossing any lines, you just say, stop now.
Not at all, not at all. Look, John, one of the reasons that I've learned over the years that one of the reasons that I felt that it was really important to put a face and a name to my story is because there are so many other women and men out there that go through something similar. They're really struggling, and I think there's a lot of people that think that they'll always just be a survivor and they'll never get past it to really flourish in their life, and that's just simply not true.
So this is quarter of a century, right? Quarter of a century ago.
Exactly.
And have you managed to get past it?
Oh, a long time ago. Yeah, my life has been, I won't say normal, I think it's been better than normal for a really long time, and it really is possible. It really comes down to, well, there's a whole host of things, which I won't, obviously it's not the appropriate forum to get into now, but you really can move beyond this. It is a choice. If you believe that you can move beyond it and flourish in your life again, then you will. You just have to believe. It is possible to fully heal. I think there's a lot of people that have this belief for whatever reason that they'll never get past it, and that's simply not true.
Rhonda McHardy talking to us a short time ago. After 6, we'll talk to Tim McKinnell. Now, you'll remember Tim, of course. He began the campaign to free Taina Pora, who had been convicted of Susan Burdett's murder. And Tim McKinnell will join us with his reaction to the announcement today that police are going to try with the Solicitor General for a third prosecution, a third court case against Malcolm Rewa for the alleged murder of Susan Burdett. We head to Washington now, as the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov did last week, along with the Russian ambassador to the US. And while they were there, according to the Washington Post, President Trump quote, revealed highly classified information, end quote, to his Russian visitors. Again, I quote from the Washington Post, the information had been provided by a US partner through an intelligence sharing arrangement considered so sensitive that details have been withheld from allies and tightly restricted even within the US government. No permission had been given to share the information with the Russians, which contained a top secret insight into the workings of Islamic State. The Democrats, of course, are outraged. More on that later in the program, but this hits a Republican soft spot too. Islamic State, highly classified intelligence, Russia, all the things the party is desperate for President Trump to be on top of. Now, David Swerdlick is assistant editor at the Washington Post, newspaper that broke the story, and I asked him if it was an overstatement to call this seriously damaging.
Well, I don't think you're overstating the case, John, and thanks for having me. First of all, let me just say that our national security reporters, the two reporters who broke this story, Greg Jaffe and Greg Miller, are two of the best. Our whole national security team has been working overtime ever since President Trump was elected. The story that they broke today, it really does take us one step further in what is really becoming a bit of a crisis mode for the administration. Let's work backwards, John. First, you had just within the last hour and a half, you had the National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, coming out and making a statement before cameras saying emphatically that the president did not reveal sources and methods. But let's remember that our reporting didn't say that he revealed sources and methods. It said that the president revealed classified information, and that statement was parsed fairly carefully. You now have this situation where, according to our reporting, the President of the United States has disclosed sensitive information provided to us by an ally. We have not disclosed the ally for obvious reasons that we were not supposed to disclose. And two, Russia, which is arguably America's greatest geopolitical foe at this moment. It is a stunning series of events. I'll just throw in there this meeting between President Trump and Foreign Minister Lavrov and Ambassador Kislyak took place the day after President Trump fired the FBI director, James Comey, in part, as he said, because he did not like the way the FBI's investigation of Russia ties was going. It's a stunning development.
It's a stunning development, and it's put in context by a great paragraph very early on in the article. This is code word information, said a US official familiar with the matter, using terminology that refers to one of the highest classification levels used by American spy agencies. Trump, quote, revealed more information to the Russian ambassador than we have shared with our own allies.
Right, and it puts the United States relationship with its national security partners in such doubt, right? I mean, we have our closest allies, among them New Zealand, Australia, Great Britain, Canada. We have close allies in the Middle East. Israel, we work with Egypt and Jordan and Saudi Arabia. There are NATO countries, Poland, France, Germany, etc. I do not know if any of these countries was the country from which this information came. But the point is, and I think this is the point you're making as well, is that wherever it came from, it's a signal to all of these countries, look, this is potentially what could happen if information is shared with U.S. intelligence services and it's not treated properly, and that does have a chilling effect on information sharing in both directions between the United States and our allies and between allies in the United States. Obviously, the United States is the biggest military and intelligence power among them, but we Americans value our relationships with the I-5 countries, with NATO, etc.
David, it's all kinds of shocking, said a former US senior official who's close. This is quoted in the Washington Post once again, and you guys have done such good work here. The next paragraph is amazing. He says to Lavrov, and this is a senior official who is being quoted here, I get great intel. I have people brief me every day on great intel. Now that assumes the kind of tone of somebody bragging that they just met Brad Pitt in a sports bar, doesn't it? I mean, is this how he was talking? Right. So here is the thing with President Trump, and I know that your listeners have followed our
election and the first 100 or so days of the Trump administration closely. Obviously, this is according to a source as told to my colleagues, but if this played out the way this was told to Washington Post reporters, it is emblematic, John, of the kind of unusual combination of hubris and amateurism that has so far been the hallmark of President Trump's administration. One of the selling points of President Trump when he was running for office was that an outsider was needed to shake up the system, that he was sort of the people's billionaire, if you will, and that, the Washington was full of the swamp of career politicians and bureaucrats. Well, what we've seen in the first 100, 110, 120 days of the administration is that, turns out, John, there's something to having experience as a politician and as a bureaucrat. You need to know how to handle these situations. And in situation after situation, folks close to President Trump, up to and including the president himself, have handled some of these situations very poorly. I don't think this is fatal in any sense to our intelligence relationships or to our position in the Middle East, but it is damaging, no question.
David Swerdlick, who's assistant editor at the Washington Post, who broke the story. Interestingly, some people are speculating that the intelligence that Donald Trump passed on to the Russian visitors came from the Five Eyes. Now, I asked David Swerdlick about that, and he said, one, he doesn't know, and two, even if he did know, he wouldn't say. There is some speculation that this is Five Eyes intelligence. Of course, New Zealand is part of the Five Eyes, but absolutely no clarification of that out of Washington, and there is unlikely to be. More on that after 6. Coming up before then, since convicted prisoner Vicky Latelli was freed from prison last November, 5 more inmates have been granted compassionate release. Vicky passed away last night, and tonight her family shares memories of the 6 months she shared with them since she left prison. Don't forget, you can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. We're on Facebook, and our email address is checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. However you are joining us, whether it's on the radio, old school styles, or on Sky TV, Freeview TV, or the internet, thank you for being with us. The government went on the front foot today over Auckland's housing crisis, announcing 34,000 new homes will be built over the next 10 years. As part of that, it will demolish more than 8,000 rundown state homes to make way for 13,000 new social houses. The rest will be sold privately. But it's not clear how many homes that first-time buyers will be able to afford, and how many will be sold at the market rate. In other words, what difference is this going to make? Sharon Brett-Kelly investigates.
The Social Housing Minister, Amy Adams, is calling it the biggest building program since the 1950s.
13,500 social houses, 20,600 market and affordable houses, and project by project we make assessments, or I should say the developers and Housing New Zealand make assessments about the specific split for each project.
She says the priority is to start demolishing the old houses to make way for the new ones, and she's promising every tenant will be rehoused. But once those 8,300 houses are pulled down, that means about 26,000 houses will be added in Auckland over the next 10 years, 2,600 a year. Ms Adams says that's as fast as the market and the city can handle.
We'd like to have all of the stock available immediately, but you've got a construction sector in Auckland that has been growing 20% year on year for the past 5 years. That's about as fast as it can grow. Obviously, with the zoning changes we needed in the Auckland Unitary Plan, that's taken time to get to a point where we can intensify the land to this level. The infrastructure that the council is responsible for, and we're helping them fund, is a part of it. All of those things have to come together.
Housing New Zealand will build most of the houses, which include projects already underway in Tamaki and Hobsonville. Ms Adams could not say how many of the 20,000 houses to be sold privately would be affordable, which she says are priced at up to $650,000. But she says the market would not work if they were all affordable.
For that market to work, we need a range of options, from the affordable rental, the affordable purchase, the first home buyer purchase, and of course as we free up properties right through that continuum, it has a flow-through effect.
The Property Institute's Chief Executive Ashley Church says it is important that most of the housing development is for private owners.
The big game for the private property market is this announcement that 20,600 of these dwellings are going to be on-sold to the property market, with an indication that an as-yet undisclosed portion of them will be set aside as affordable housing for disadvantaged buyers and first-home buyers, which is great news.
But he says the plan falls short of the 40,000 new houses needed right now.
So the problem we've got at the moment is that to the extent that people are buying, they're primarily buying existing dwellings. We actually need them to be building new properties because that's how you make a dent in that 40,000. And so what we still need to sit alongside policies like this is initiatives which are about encouraging people to do just that.
The head of community housing Aotearoa, Scott Figgenshaw, says the government is finally recognising the scale of the housing problem in Auckland, but he worries that the so-called affordable housing will be out of reach of many families.
You know, a $700,000 house isn't necessarily affordable to a family on the median income, and my worry is that that kind of language play here may be delivering a whole lot of housing that won't actually be affordable.
Scott Figgenshaw says he wants to see more detail about how Housing New Zealand will be funded to build the houses. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi ko Sharon Brett Kelly, aho.
Convicted fraudster Vicky Latelli died late last night, 6 months after being granted compassionate release from prison. Diagnosed as terminally ill, the mother of three was initially denied compassionate release, but her family fought a very public campaign on her behalf, and the parole board granted release on compassionate grounds last November. She spent much of the time since at home with her partner and their children, but as her position deteriorated and her pain increased, she spent more and more time in hospital. And her uncle, Ula Latelli, who led the campaign for her release, of course, said she went in again yesterday.
When she was hospitalised and they checked her, they found that there wasn't much else to do. And when she came back out of the operating theatre, we were told it was literally an hour to possibly a day. And it ended up being about 3 or 4 hours.
And were you all with her?
Yes, the family was with her right the way through, and close family friends. So, yeah, it was a real blessing. I think, people need to be able to grieve in a proper way. They need to be able to feel out in a proper way. They need to be able to release their emotions in a way that's healthy. And that's what we were able to do last night, and in particular the parents and the siblings and the rest of the family that were there. And we have a strong faith in the Lord, and we know that we will see Vicky again when the Lord comes again. And we just celebrate the many wonderful things, the short time that we've had. She's only 36. And also the time that she spent with her children and her partner has just been a real blessing. So the fact that we got an extra 4 months on top of the prognosis that she was given of less than 5, you take and spend every special moment. It's important for us to remember that our lives are made up with just moments. And she really maximised the opportunity to live her life with her partner and the children. Danica, the daughter, Henari, the next son, and Chris, the youngest. So, no, it's really, we're just very thankful that we're able. The good Lord blessed Vicky and blessed us also with the time to spend with her in a quality way.
Ula, I've been looking at the original parole board decision from October, which was to decline compassionate release, of course, and it says, and I quote, "The time will inevitably come when her condition deteriorates to the extent that she requires hospice care, and at that time compassionate release would be appropriate." How long in real terms would that have given you with Vicky? Do you know that, Ula?
Well, the ruling that they have is they give it 3 days. So when they know that the person's only got 3 days left to live, then they release them, and by which time they're pretty much comatose and are really unable to spend any form, shape of quality of life with the family. So I'm just prayerful that, and it's Vicky's desire, she started doing some work with the Health and Disability Commission, that her example can be used to help others in a similar situation and being released on true compassionate grounds where they can spend quality of life without having to wait until you're on your deathbed to come out and essentially just lie there and not be able to enjoy and fellowship and love and farewell in a way that is appropriate and is humane.
Ula, how do we get the balancing act right here? The family had to lobby to get Vicky out. They had to lobby really hard. Now, she'd been sent to prison. No one denied her guilt. Her doctors all said she was dying. How is compassionate release achieved fairly and reasonably in these circumstances?
Well, we always try to look to the bright side of life, but it's about being compassionate and loving and caring and being humane, extending your hand to help somebody in need, and irrespective and in spite of whatever their circumstance might be. She made a mistake. She was paying for that, and then given a life sentence simply because her illness was terminal, but not to punish people because of it if they have been told that they've only got a limited period of time to live.
Ura Latali talking to us earlier. Since Vicky Latali was freed from prison last November, 5 more inmates have been granted compassionate release. It's 5 more inmates. The parole board says since November last year, 8 cases have been referred to it, of which 2 were declined, 1 offender died before the application could be considered, and 5 were approved. Compassionate release. It's 29 minutes to 6. Your checkpoint on RNZ coming up, Nona, with business. The Transport Ministry launches a fresh investigation into fraudster Joanne Harrison, and Auckland University says it's had to ration food parcels because it can't meet the demand from cash-strapped students. We're also back in Washington, but before all of that, here's Katrina with the headlines.
A lawyer who's previously represented Malcolm Rewa says he's disappointed the police are seeking to retry him over the killing of Susan Burdett. Rewa, who's a convicted serial rapist, was twice tried for the 1992 murder, but neither jury could reach a verdict. Barry Hart says there's no way Malcolm Rewa could get a fair trial because he's been convicted by the press and the public. The Labour Party says National's plan to build houses in Auckland is not credible, given how long the government has been in denial about the housing crisis. More than 8,500 state houses will be demolished and replaced with 34,000 new houses over the next decade. 13,500 will be social homes, with the rest to be sold on the open market. Labour's leader Andrew Little says it's a drop in the bucket of what's needed. Opposition parties are calling for anyone who lost their job at the Transport Ministry after raising concerns about the convicted fraudster Joanne Harrison to be compensated. The New Zealand First Leader says they should be the government's first priority. Democrat leaders in the United States are demanding the president explain allegations he discussed classified intelligence with the Russian foreign minister and ambassador at the White House last week. The Washington Post reported Donald Trump jeopardized a critical source of intelligence relating to Islamic State. A 19-year-old is in a critical condition in Wellington Hospital after suffering a head injury during a club rugby match at the weekend. The man was rushed from the Porirua ground by ambulance and had surgery on Saturday night. The blogger Cameron Slater has told the High Court that he wasn't the only journalist trying to get to the bottom of the Colin Craig story, but he's the only one being sued. Mr Slater is giving evidence at the High Court in Auckland, where he's being sued by the former Conservative Party leader for defamation. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6.
Thanks, Katrina, so much. Let's turn to business news now with Nona Peltier, who's sitting beside me. An investment bank, Nona, has put out research indicating that New Zealand's housing market has a 40% chance of going bust. Now, as Katrina was reading the headlines, I started miming to you, bust over the next 2 years. How real is this concern? But first, what does bust mean in this context?
Well, in this context, Goldman Sachs has looked at 10... Well, first of all, it's a Bloomberg report, so we haven't actually seen the Goldman Sachs report. We're quoting from a Bloomberg report, and we've seen headlines in all across the media today as a result of this report. Now, so a 40% chance of going bust. Goldman Sachs is an investment bank, and they say that a bust is when prices fall more than 5% over a period of time. Now,
is it rude for me to reflect that Goldman Sachs would know what they were talking about after the GFC?
You can say what you like.
That was a little dig, which I enjoyed enormously. Anyway, move on. Sorry.
Okay, so yes, so that's the 5%. Now, interestingly, we've had double-digit growth. In our recent statistics even show that our growth across the country has been quite strong, 11%. So whether or not, a 5% fall is going to be material in the sense of a bust, people have to say what they want. But, what's happening now is we've got some economists saying, well, look, we have really not very much to worry about. Others who would be criticizing, the whole situation with our housing crisis are saying, well, there you go, pointing to this idea of a bust. But 5%?
I saw Burnett Hickey on Twitter saying Auckland's already back 5% from where it was.
Yeah,
okay.
It's probably not a major thing. And also, one of the things that's really interesting is that Goldman Sachs noted in the research is that the house price predictor, which they've been producing for a while, has some drawbacks. And one of them is that it predicts housing busts often.
Right. Gosh, it's fascinating though, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's really interesting.
Yeah.
Even the world is looking at the New Zealand housing market and puzzled by it.
Well, the basic income to cost ratio, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter where you are, that stands.
And exactly. And also when you look at just the situation in New Zealand with a shortage of housing, it's hard to see it going bust when there's people, looking for homes, large numbers, and not enough supply coming online for some time to come. So,
what happened on the markets today, unknown? Is there anything else I need to ask you?
no, that's enough.
Okay, thanks, Nona.
The NZX Top 50 Index, it ended down, again, just exactly the same as yesterday, nearly 0.33%, 22 points, this time to 7,408. The New Zealand dollar is little change, and there has been some movement in the big dollar, the US dollar. People are a little unsure about whether or not there are going to be interest rate hikes in the U.S. because the economic data coming out there is quite weak. So the New Zealand dollar is 68.9 US cents, just about where it was yesterday, 92.9 Australian and 53.2 British pence.
Nona Peltzer, thank you very much. The Transport Ministry has launched a fresh investigation after former staff came forward saying they believe the fraudster Joanne Harrison forced them out. Just 2 months ago, the ministry rejected the Labor Party's call for exactly such an investigation after the transport agency manager was jailed for stealing nearly $750,000. Here's our political reporter, Benedict Collins.
Joanne Harrison ran rampant at the Transport Ministry, stealing more than $720,000 by paying companies that didn't exist for work that was never done. She tricked another government agency into hiring her husband and got a friend a job at the ministry. That friend spent 10 months on the payroll, but never turned up for work. Labour's transport spokesperson Sue Moroney has also accused Harrison of getting rid of staff who were trying to raise red flags about her. In March, the chief executive, Peter Mercy, rejected Sue Moroney's call for an investigation. But Mr Mercy now says the publicity following that story led to former staff contacting him, and as a result, an investigation is being launched.
The approaches I've had are from people who have left the ministry for a number of reasons. And now on reflection, given what they've heard about Joanne and who she really was, they are saying, well, actually, is what happened to me or were the circumstances, were they fair?
Mr Mercy says the investigation will be totally independent.
To provide everyone, and including the people that have approached me, with some degree of comfort that I'm not just going to, brush it under the table. That's the reason I've actually gone externally and asked for someone who's independent and has some standing to review the process and give me their assessment.
But Ms Moroney says the delay in holding an investigation is unacceptably slack.
Anyone with any level of political instinct would have realised that a person of the nature of Joanne Harrison being in charge of restructurings and issues to do with the financial department, when you look back at it, that should never have happened. And I'm really disappointed it's taken the Ministry of Transport this long to realise that that issue needed investigating properly.
And it appears Peter Mercy required some prompting. In March, the State Services Commissioner Peter Hughes wrote to him saying the new allegations potentially raise wider issues about the ministry's culture and operating environment. Today, Mr Hughes refused to be interviewed. But he issued a statement saying that he talked to Mr Mercy about the need for him to look into concerns raised by staff about Joanne Harrison's conduct. The New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters says anyone who lost their job because they raised concerns about Joanne Harrison should be the first priority.
Let's deal with those 3 staff who lost their jobs, and apparently others as well, and ensure that being an honest whistleblower in the interest of the taxpayer and the country does not get you the worst kind of outcome which sadly happens in New Zealand. Now, they've become victims, and they should be compensated.
A former Deputy State Services Commissioner, Sandy Beattie, will carry out the investigation into whether Harrison unfairly got rid of staff. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Benedict Collins.
We're going to stay in Parliament a bit longer. The Labour Party's list process and debates over Māori prisons and charter schools have raised questions about whether its Māori MPs have a strong voice within its caucus. All of its Māori electorate MPs have opted to go off the list, prompting criticism. The list is notable for the absence of Māori in the higher places. And discussion about Māori offending and education have thrown up conflicts that can occur between MPs advocating for Māori and Labour's broader constituency. So, our political editor, Jane Patterson, spoke to some of the party's Māori MPs at Labour's annual Congress about their place in the caucus and the recent controversies.
A senior figure in Labour's Māori caucus, Kelvin Davis, last week floated establishing a prison based on Māori values to help reduce reoffending rates. That was effectively and quickly shot down by the leader Andrew Little, who said while it was an idea worth exploring, it was not party policy. Mr Davis says that's fair enough.
He was just being straight up honest that it isn't Labour policy, but it is on the table, and it's our role to put things out there in the public domain and have discussion around it. It's one thing in opposition to bang on and be critical of the government, but we do actually have to come out with the alternative, with solutions that for the country, for the well-being of everybody.
The Tamaki Makaurau MP Penny Henare says Māori MPs are very comfortable with their place within the caucus and their ability to express their views.
As you can imagine, there are always hairy issues that come up, but we've certainly worked together and we're able to voice our opinion collectively, and where we might not all come to an agreement as a Māori caucus, that's fine as well.
Debate around what Labour would do with charter schools, including the one linked to its candidate Willie Jackson, blew up last week. Both Mr Jackson and Mr Henare said there'd be a strong case for many of the charter schools to stay open under a Labour government, despite the party being opposed to the model. Mr Henare says representing a Māori constituency, as well as being a Labour MP, means sometimes those two things do bump up against each other.
It naturally does, doesn't it? There are issues that I've often thought, and my support for those Māori educational outcomes, whether it be through charter schools. I'm a big supporter of that, and I often wonder if we're going to cherry pick the good things from charter schools and get rid of the bad ones. I wonder if such a review is done on state schools, where you get rid of the bad ones and keep the good ones. Those are questions that my constituents ask.
Lewis Wall is a Māori MP but holds the general electorate seat of Manurewa. Ms Wall says there is room for open debate in the party, and Māori MPs have the same opportunities to progress ideas as any other caucus member. But she does acknowledge having all of the Māori electorate seat MPs opt off the list means Māori are not well represented at the top of the list.
On the face of it, we haven't provided for Māori, because there isn't a Māori in the top 15. That's the reality, and I think our rationale and justification for that actually has to be seen in the actions of our six incumbent Māori electorate MPs, who did so because A, they have confidence in their own abilities to retain their seats, but B, because they did want to create the space for other Māori to join our Labour caucus.
She says regardless, Labour could end up with Māori MPs comprising up to a third of its caucus after the election. But she says not having senior MPs on the list, but very promising candidates in winnable places, is something for the party to keep in mind next time.
We constructed a list based on a whole lot of knowns from our perspective, but possibly it's not a list that has been easily understood by the general public. And so the party have to look at that. Potentially it's a learning for them.
Andrew Little says any criticisms his Māori MPs do not have an equal voice in the caucus are unfounded. He says all of the MPs fight to have their ideas put forward.
For a leader, it's a balance between saying, OK, we've got to find a way to process that idea and get the best out of it. On the other hand, we've got to demonstrate to the public at large that this is a party that is organised, has got itself together and can make good decisions and is disciplined in doing so. And there's always a bit of a balance in that.
He says he backs his Māori electorate seat MPs in their decision to go off the list and the party's commitment to improving the lot of all Māori. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Auckland University says it's had to ration the number of food parcels it gives out because it can't meet the demand from cash-strapped students. This comes after a survey by Unitec found that 17% of nearly 2,000 students regularly go without food or other necessities because they can't afford them. Our reporter Jessie Chang hit the streets of Auckland to find out how hard up some students really are.
Auckland University of Technology student Byron Ford says he receives about $170 a week for living costs, but his rent costs $220. He works 30 hours a week to pay the shortfall, plus food and other expenses.
And with full-time uni as well, that's actually pretty difficult, especially seeing I was in third year. For me, it feels like I'm just always at work or at uni.
Auckland University student Simon O'Donnell lives in Glenfield on the North Shore because he can't afford the high prices closer to the university in the city centre. He says the flat isn't ideal.
It's damp and it's cold and it's very far away from uni. It takes me about an hour to get to uni most days, so yeah, it's a bit of a hassle sometimes.
Sala Tuku Afu lives at home and says many of her friends do too. However, she says up to 2/3 of her $60 a week student allowance goes on public transport to get her to lectures and tutorials. She says sometimes she waits until she gets home to eat in order to save money.
If I have to start buying like lunch for school and stuff, then yeah, it's not enough.
The president of the Auckland University Students Association, Will Matthews, says the level of government support for students doesn't cover the cost of living in Auckland. He says the average cost of renting a room in Auckland is $250 a week, which is the same as the maximum student allowance. Mr Matthews says an increasing number of students are turning to the Students Association for welfare services.
We run a student advice hub, a food bank which does food parcels and various welfare and student support payments. Access to all of those things has increased, and we in fact have to limit the number of food parcels that students are able to take because we are unable to resource the demand.
The Minister for Tertiary Education, Skills and Employment, Paul Goldsmith, says while he's aware rents have increased faster than student support payments in some areas, allowances are inflation adjusted and can include an accommodation top-up of up to $40 a week. He says while costs can seem daunting, there has always been an expectation that students and their families will make their own financial contribution. For Checkpoint, ko Jessie Chang aho.
Thanks, Jessie. And the problem isn't just in Auckland. Rory Lenahan-Ikenand, president of the Victoria University Students Association, Wellington, of course, told our reporter Zach Fleming that students in the capital are suffering too.
No one's in denial that student life is going to be a bit rough around the edges, and students are totally accepting of that. But when that becomes fundamentally, not having enough to eat and being hungry, and as I said, not having enough money to actually get to class, that's a fundamental impact on how successful our students are, and therefore how successful our country is.
So is the problem just that living costs and the student allowance hasn't kept up with the cost of living?
Yeah, that's right. For example, we've seen Wellington rents, the city that I'm the student president in, go up significantly in the last few years. The latest figures show us that the average room in a student suburb in Wellington is about $218, which is significantly more.
And the full allowance is $200, isn't it? So the rent is more than the allowance now.
Exactly. The allowance, which is meant to cover all your costs, is falling short of the cost of rent alone.
Rory Lenahan-Ikenand, who is president of the Victoria University Students Association. Let's go to Otago, where Sage Burke, who is student services manager at Otago University Students Association, says students are regularly asking for help because they can't afford to feed themselves.
We regularly see students come in and they've got $20 or $30 left a week for food on average after they've paid their bills, and often there's those weeks that come up where they've had to pay for something extra and there's just no money left for food or anything else.
So these students are, in some cases, living paycheck to paycheck and have nothing left over?
I would say the majority of the people that we see would be living paycheck to paycheck.
Student Services Manager at Otago University Students Association talking to Zach Fleming. The blogger Cameron Slater has told the High Court that he was only doing his job as a journalist by writing about the former leader of the Conservative Party, Colin Craig. Mr Slater has begun giving evidence in his own defence at the High Court in Auckland, where Mr Craig is suing him for defamation. Mr Slater has a counterclaim against Mr Craig for a booklet that he published and sent to 1.6 million households around the country. Our Auckland Court reporter Edward Gay filed this report.
Cameron Slater said he went to a range of sources to find out the nature of Mr Craig's relationship with his press secretary Rachel McGregor and what caused her sudden resignation days before the 2014 election.
I am by profession a journalist. I was simply doing my job. Politically, Colin Craig and I are both on the right side of politics, but I value democracy. As with all media, this was no more than holding Colin Craig to account. Doing what all media do, we were seeking the truth so the public could decide if Colin Craig was suitable for public office.
He said Mr Craig was involved in a cover-up as the story developed, claiming that Miss McGregor had resigned over a pay dispute. Mr Slater then released a copy of Mr Craig's poem on his blog.
Colin Craig claims this is dirty politics in the sense coined by Nicky Hager. It is not paid-for journalism. It is a genuine old-style media news scoop of a politician caught with his pants down, trying to cover up the claims of sexual harassment by a younger female press secretary.
Mr Slater said he wasn't the only one chasing the story.
I have been selected for these proceedings by the plaintiff, who is known to use Chapman Tripp as his bully boys to shut down criticism of him. He is very wealthy and can and does push over everyone he can to get his way.
Earlier, the court heard evidence from Beverly Adair Beats, the former press secretary for the Conservative Party, who took over after Rachel McGregor's resignation. During cross-examination, Mr Slater's lawyer Brian Henry read out a part of a tweet from Miss McGregor, published the day Mr Craig made a public statement saying the pair had acted inappropriately.
Colin Craig is trying to frame me as a mistress. Now, in terms of media, pretty good retort.
After a lengthy pause, Miss Adair Beats had this to say.
I'm sorry she did that.
What?
Sorry, I just...
You said she said, I'm sorry she did.
I'm sorry she said that on her behalf.
Mr Henry suggested that could be Miss McGregor's side of the story.
And maybe she's right. Have you thought of that? Or are you so beholden and besotted with Mr Craig she couldn't be right?
Rachel has been a friend. I'm not where you besotted. What the heck is that? I'm not sure why you would make a statement like that. I mean, he was my boss. He's not a close confidant or a friend as such. Like,
I'm
questioning you. Yes, you are, and you've used you've used those words, besotted. Good grief! I mean, sorry. It's just wrong. I may be a lot of things, but I have integrity, and my yes is yes and no is no. And as far as I'm concerned, yes, I have felt for Rachel all along. I had from the moment I met her. So there's nothing personal against her in any shape or form.
Mr Adair Beats told Mr Henry his line of questioning was wrong, and she couldn't say why Miss McGregor said what she did. The trial before Justice Toogood is due to hear evidence from Miss McGregor and former Conservative Party Chief Executive Christine Rankin. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi ko Edward Gaiaho.
Police are hunting for a vandal who ripped up the South Canterbury town's brand new cricket pitch, 2 rugby fields and a soccer pitch ahead of the winter sports season. Pleasant Point's sports domain has been left devastated after a car tore through the grounds early yesterday morning, and residents are understandably really furious. Logan Church reports.
The Pleasant Point domain is home to 3 sports clubs who were all looking forward to a busy winter sports season. But at around 3 o'clock yesterday morning, a green Nissan Terrano drove over the park's barrier and started doing skids and donuts on the wet ground. The president of the Pleasant Point Rugby Football Club, Jeremy Cunningham, says he was devastated when he heard the news.
In a small community, for someone to just go out and do it, and there's obviously no means behind it. It's not like they've got a gripe with a club or anything, you would presume. Some idiot that's too much time on their hands and just gone out and done something just absolutely with no rhyme or reason.
Jeremy Cunningham says he has had to cancel some rugby games, but the new $22,000 cricket pitch, completed only a year ago, suffered the worst damage with deep ruts all over it. Pleasant Point's constable, Chris Howes, says the culprit could be a local.
Possibly within the area, potentially there could be just outside Point and maybe in another rural wee town. Just given that the location where they've got onto the sports field, they've had to know that there's access sort of there.
The Timaru District Council's Parks and Recreation Manager, Bill Steens, says the council has already received offers of free grass seed, as well as the offer of manpower to sow it. But he says it could be some time before the grounds are back to their usual standard.
The unfortunate thing with this is that we can't really do anything to repair it until spring,
because the new grass won't come away with the cold. We're starting to get frost now and the grass just won't grow.
Mr Steens says the council may have to increase security around the park, such as stronger fencing. Mr Steens says he hopes the driver feels guilty for destroying such a popular facility.
I would hope that whoever did it woke up and regrets what they do and think about what they do from now on. And I'm sure that the locals will be definitely more vigilant in the future, and I don't think anyone else would get away with it.
Back at the rugby club, Jeremy Cunningham says they'll have to find a new field to call home.
I was there on Saturday with my young 4.5-year-old, with the JAB teams, and that's all the fields that, they run round on. Now you've got ruts and stuff all through them, so it's not just the top of the club, it's from the little guys right through to the top. And not to mention the general public that walk their dogs and do other things on the fields as well.
The police are now going through CCTV footage and asking for any witnesses to the incident that's made Pleasant Point a bit less pleasant to come forward. For Checkpoint, call Logan Church Tanay.
4.5 minutes to 6, you're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. Let's go to an uninhabited island in the middle of the South Pacific, which is also a World Heritage Site. Now, it is uninhabited, except for plastic. It's been declared the worst place in the world for plastic pollution. It's hard to imagine, but on Henderson Island, the largest of the Pitcairn Island group, there's an estimated 38 million items of plastic carried there on ocean currents. The ABC's Felicity Ogilvie reports.
Henderson Island should be a tropical paradise. The small World Heritage listed coral atoll is in the middle of the South Pacific Ocean and humans have never lived there. But instead it's become the world's dumping ground for plastic. University of Tasmania scientist Jennifer Lavers found the beaches of Henderson Island are littered with almost 38 million pieces of plastic.
The extent of the pollution on Henderson Island, despite a career spent travelling to remote uninhabited islands documenting plastic, was like nothing I had really ever seen or kind of prepared myself for. There's not really any bare sand where you can kind of place your foot without stepping on fragments of goodness knows what, a shampoo bottle to a fishing float to everything in between.
Dr. Lavers lived on Henderson Island for 3 months. In that time, she found that each square metre of the island is littered with 671 pieces of plastic.
The sorting, the counting, the weighing, the categorising took months.
Only 7% of the plastic she found came from passing ships, the rest was from landfill. Items such as baby dummies, toys and plastic bags.
One of the big lessons that we learned from this study was that no country got a free pass in this. We found bottles and containers and all kinds of items from just about everywhere, from Germany to the UK to Canada to Brazil, you name it, we found it. And so what that means is, in a sense, we've all kind of contributed to this problem, and it's therefore our responsibility to help clean it up.
That's pretty shocking, and in fact, no place on the planet is safe from plastic pollution.
That's Jeff Angel. He leads the Boomerang Alliance, a group of almost 50 environment groups in Australia that are campaigning to increase the nation's recycling habits and reduce waste.
We can certainly ban some items like single-use lightweight plastic bags. We can put in place much better collection systems, which is the main function of the container refund measures that are now spreading across Australia. We can find alternatives, organic alternatives that degrade very quickly in the environment. And even the plastics industry can get on board and produce some better products.
Dr. Jennifer Lavers says people don't need to wait for governments and businesses to make changes about the way plastic is used. She says people can make a difference by the way they brush their teeth.
Far and away, one of the most common items was toothbrushes. I could have supplied an entire city with toothbrushes. Toothbrushes is a really great example because there are alternatives available. My toothbrush at home is made out of bamboo, so mine will biodegrade, whereas a plastic toothbrush will never break up, it will never go away.
Jennifer Lavers will be returning to Henderson Island in a few years to find out if changes to the way people use plastic will reduce waste. Her research is being published today in a scientific journal called the National Academy of Sciences.
It's Felicity Ogilvie from the ABC. Amazing. Lots of feedback coming in. We're going to try and read this before 6. Read Malcolm Rewa. Rhonda, this is Rhonda Mahari, who was raped by Malcolm Rewa in the early 90s. You wonderful woman. For your intuition, your courage, your dignity, your being prepared to come forward and give yourself as an example of all those people who've experienced this horror of rape, sexual abuse, and especially for showing everyone that it is possible to not only survive rape, but to be able to make a good life and not let it damage and incapacitate the rest of your life. Congratulations, says Anne G. A very heartfelt message from Anne G to you, Rhonda. We hope you are still listening. It's 6 o'clock on Checkpoint.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. A woman raped by the serial attacker Malcolm Rewa says it's a really big deal that he may be charged again with murdering Susan Burdett. The Solicitor General has agreed to apply to the High Court to have the prison inmate retried a third time for the murder of the Auckland woman in 1992. In the previous trials, the juries couldn't reach a verdict. Rhonda McCarty was raped by Rewa 2 weeks before Ms Burdett's murder. She says she had given up on a retrial as a lost cause.
It matters to me personally because at the time that I was attacked, I was quite sure he was capable of killing me. And so for the police to be even open to retrying him for the murder of the woman that he raped 2 weeks after me is a really big deal.
Rhonda McCarty. The Social Housing Minister says a plan to build 34,000 new houses over the next 10 years in Auckland is as fast as the market can handle. Amy Adams announced the plan to demolish more than 8,000 rundown state houses and build 13,500 social houses and 20,600 to be sold privately. Sharon Brett Kelly reports.
The Minister says the priority is to start demolishing the old houses to make way for new ones, and she's promising every tenant will be rehoused. Overall, the plan means about 26,000 more houses will be added to Auckland over the next 10 years, about 2,600 a year. Ms Adams says that's as fast as the market and the city can handle. She could not say how many of the 20,000 houses to be sold privately would be affordable, at prices up to $650,000. The Property Institute's Chief Executive Ashley Church says it is important most of the housing development is for private owners, but he says the plan falls short of the 40,000 new houses Auckland needs right now. This is Sharon Brett Kelly.
The investment bank Goldman Sachs believes New Zealand's housing market has a 40% chance of going bust in the next 2 years. A report says this country's housing market is the most overvalued and most vulnerable of a group of 10 developed economies. Other countries said to be at risk include Canada, Sweden, Australia and Norway. Growth in house prices slowed to about 11% nationally in April from more than 14% last September as the Reserve Bank has tightened bank lending rules. Opposition parties are calling for anyone who lost their job at the Transport Ministry after raising concerns about the convicted fraudster Joanne Harrison to be compensated. The New Zealand First leader says they should be the government's first priority. Political reporter Benedict Collins has more.
In March, the Chief Executive, Peter Mercy, rejected Labour's call for an investigation into claims Joanne Harrison influenced a restructure to get rid of staff who raised concerns about her. But he says since then, former staff have contacted him and an investigation has now been launched. Winston Peters says anyone who lost their job should be the first priority. Labour's Sue Moroney says Joanne Harrison's mode of operation has been to get rid of staff who could expose her, and attempted whistleblowers must be compensated if the allegations are substantiated. From Parliament, Benedict Collins.
Senior figures in the White House are flatly rejecting media allegations that President Donald Trump revealed classified intelligence about Islamic State to the Russian Foreign Minister at a meeting last week. The National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, says he was at the meeting and the claims are false. The BBC's David Willis reports.
Donald Trump was once highly concerned about revealing America's secrets. On the campaign trail, he attacked Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server and accused her of putting the country at risk. That the president might have shared classified information with America's prime adversary is causing concern even amongst his staunchest allies. The Republican Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, said he'd be seeking a full explanation while Senator Bob Corker, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, said the administration seemed to be caught in what he called a downward spiral.
David Willis. A private tertiary institution that used to have 1,000 foreign students has lost its registration. The Qualifications Authority says Linguists International Institute had ongoing problems, including widespread plagiarism. Grant Clinkham from NZQA says the institute tried to improve, but the authority found evidence its problems had become more serious.
We took away 53 examples of assessment and we remarked them. We found that 37 of those 53 had been given a pass grade, but should not have been.
Grant Clinkham says Linguist now has 81 students and they'll be tested to confirm whether they should keep grades they've got so far. It's 6:05. To sport, and the Warriors centre Blake Ashford says he found it hard to sleep in the wake of Saturday's National Rugby League nightmare against the Penrith Panthers. The Warriors threw away a 22-point half-time lead to lose 36-28 in Western Sydney, the worst collapse in the club's history. They slipped to 12th on the NRL ladder, and Ashford says it's been keeping him up at night.
Hard to sleep a couple of nights after the game. We've come in today and watched the video and sort of done our best to try and sweep it under the rug. It wasn't too pleasing, and a lot of truths were told, and we were just honest with each other.
Blake Ashford. Meanwhile, wing Manu Vatave, centre Solomone Kate and forward Simon Mannering have all been ruled out of Friday's clash with the Dragons in Hamilton. Team New Zealand had a tough day on the water in America's Cup practice in Bermuda today, first breaking their rudder before nosediving the boat. They returned to the water after repairing the rudder, but it didn't take part in any of today's practice races. Midfielder Rolly Bonavacia is the latest player to leave the Phoenix following the departure of All Whites goalkeeper Glenn Moss and coach Ernie Merrick. Bonavacia, who was off contract at the Wellington club, has signed with A-League football rivals, the Western Sydney Wanderers. And the Boston Celtics advanced to NBA basketball's Eastern Conference Finals with a 115-105 win over the Washington Wizards in today's deciding Game 7 of their semi-final series. The Celtics play the defending champion Cleveland Cavaliers for a place in the NBA Finals. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, 20 years after Deep Blue took out the chess champion Garry Kasparov, Mark Anderson looks back on the event that signalled the arrival of big data. We have a window on the world of McDonald's and its attempts to go upmarket. Well, our feminist pundit Deborah Russell wants to talk about toys because she wonders whether that's where it all begins. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. From Northland to North Taranaki, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taumarunui. Rain spreading eastwards later today and tomorrow morning with some heavy falls. Rain easing to a few showers from the west tomorrow afternoon and evening. Northerly strengthening, gale for a time. From South Taranaki to Wellington, also Taihape, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Cloud increasing today, rain spreading east tomorrow morning, then clearing from the west, apart from showers in Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast and Wellington. Northerly gales about the central high country tomorrow morning. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller and Westland, rain spreading east overnight with heavy falls in the north and west. Canterbury and Otago, cloud increasing, periods of rain tomorrow, mainly morning and evening. Southland and Fiordland, high cloud today, rain spreading north tomorrow, and for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with late rain tomorrow. It's exactly 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. It shouldn't have taken this long, but it is excellent news. That's the reaction of the private investigator and former police detective who worked on the Tainapura case after the police announced they are seeking to retry Malcolm Rewa for the killing of Susan Burdett. Rewa, a convicted serial rapist, was tried twice for the Auckland woman's 1992 murder, but both juries were unable to reach a verdict. Instead, Tainapura spent more than 20 years in jail for Ms Burdett's rape and murder, but his convictions were overturned in 2015. I spoke to Tim McKinnell, who campaigned tirelessly for Mr Porter's release shortly after he got a call from police with the news.
It's good news, and it's a step in the right direction. It's something that, in terms of Susan's murder, it's something that we've been concerned about for a very long time, and we've been asking police for many years to take an objective and complete look at all the evidence, and this announcement suggests that that's exactly what they're doing now.
We have to be careful, of course, because if this trial goes ahead, then Malcolm Rewa deserves a fair trial and sub judice applies and all that kind of stuff. So let's trace the story back to Tēnā Pōra and remind everyone of your involvement. It is simply a statement of fact to say that had you not begun to be confused about his conviction and what seemed on the face of it to be a striking lack of evidential support for it, none of this would be happening, Tim.
Yeah, I mean, that's a generous interpretation. There's been a great deal of people that have been involved in this process, and it's excellent news, but there's a long way to go, and there's more work to be done. And I think the strongest thing we can say at the moment is that every indication is that the police are looking at Susan's murder with an open mind for the first time in a long time.
It is important to note that Malcolm Rewa has been to trial twice before, charged with the murder of Susan Burdett, and both times the jury couldn't reach a verdict, right?
That's correct.
And so what happened after that? What do you believe happened after that? And once again, I need to say explicitly that there is no determination being made in this interview about guilt or innocence. But when you say the police are looking at this with an open mind, what happened after those two trials, do you think?
Well, after a second trial, Tēnā was successful with an appeal, and he had his second trial. Tēnā was again convicted, and shortly after those convictions were entered, he was found guilty at his second trial in 2000. Almost nothing happened for a great number of years, and so Tēnā sat in prison and wondered whether he would ever see justice. And I'm pleased to say that that his exoneration and him being proved innocent was a great relief to him and us. But the first step in Susan's murder being properly solved, we think.
And so now, I guess, after everything, it is simply time to let the right things happen. The police mount this case for the third time, as you say, with a completely open mind, and for it to go through court, if indeed that is what occurs.
That's right, if that occurs. There's a long way to go to get to that point. We've offered any and all assistance that they might require from us from our work over the years. And again, the focus for us is Susan's murder and what happened to her. We'll do whatever we can to help the police establish the truth in respect of her death.
And do you believe that because of all the work you've done, and it has been extensive, that you may be able to provide evidential support for the prosecution case?
It's difficult to say at this stage, but we've certainly made it clear to police we're happy to sit down and talk with them about our investigation, about our legal work, and what it is that we've established over the last 9 or 10 years.
Should it have taken this long, Tim, to be at this point?
It shouldn't have taken this long for police to be reviewing Susan's murder with an open mind. I don't think it should have taken this long. But it has. This is where we are, and now's not the time for us to be critical or to focus on things that we can't change. We're just grateful that the police are looking at this again properly after all these years. It's excellent news.
Tim McKinn talking to us just after he heard the news. The White House has denied an explosive media report that Donald Trump revealed highly classified information to the Russian Foreign Minister and Ambassador last week. The Washington Post claimed the president jeopardised a critical source of intelligence relating to Islamic State. Now, earlier on Checkpoint, we spoke to David Swerdlick, who is assistant editor at the Post. Karun Demirjian is a congressional reporter for the paper, now in DC. She was formerly in Moscow. She says there are so many perplexing things here that President Trump has disclosed highly confidential intelligence, that in doing so he's betrayed the confidence and trust of an ally and source, that he's done so in the company of an adversary, Russia, and that he's displayed a striking lack of judgment in doing all of that. America has close allies, NATO powers, of course, the Five Eyes partners and so on, but you don't even have these conversations with them.
It is perplexing to many people who are watching. I mean, look, if it were New Zealand that he was divulging things to, that would still be problematic. You're not supposed to be unleashing this sort of highly classified information for many of the reasons that I listed. But yes, there's an added layer of what is going on here when the entity, the people to whom you're divulging this information are representatives of an adversary nation. Now, maybe we're not enemy nations with Russia. This is not the Cold War, but they're an adversary, and very, very few people, including high-level Trump advisors, would say that Russia's a friend. But yes, Russia does seem to be sitting on the president's brainstem, whether we're talking about, the allegations that there was collusion between his campaign officials and the Kremlin, or we're talking about the isolated episode of the Comey firing, where he even said in that NBC interview that, he said in the letter that he appreciates that Comey told him that he wasn't under investigation, which is a conversation we haven't been able to, verify actually took place. But in itself is problematic if that was happening, because you're not supposed to do that if you're investigating the president. And also the interview he gave, where he was saying, we drafted this memo about the Clinton emails, but I was going to fire him anyway. I didn't like this Russia stuff. I thought there was a witch hunt about the, Trump-Russia, it's all made up. So clearly the Russia storyline, the Russia element, I should have said, keeps surfacing in these different ways. And if you're anybody that works in the United States, you wonder what's next. What does this mean as an example of what might happen in the future, particularly vis-a-vis the Russians, but in any situation. And so you've just got a whole bunch of, I suppose, raised eyebrows is the most innocuous way to put it, and people becoming absolutely apoplectic, worrying about what this means, is the more strong way to put it. But certainly, everybody, Democrats are outraged, and Republicans are very perplexed and wanting answers from the White House, and not just accepting the line that, he was in his rights and the article is wrong. These are fairly serious allegations, and they're coming from the Washington Post first. About an hour after we posted the story, the New York Times matched, and it matched largely what that story said. BuzzFeed also put out a story that matched many of the points. So this is not we're standing by the story, but even if you were to question the Washington Post, it's not like other news organizations of repute have not also backed up points that we made that call into question what went on here and whether it was appropriate. I don't think anybody's saying it's illegal, but sometimes appropriate and something that's discomforting is all that matters.
Karun, you said the Democrats are outraged. Of course they are. That's their default setting with Trump, right? But the Republican response...
So many options.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's it. It's autopilot outrage. But the Republican response is fascinating, because if we look at where the Republicans are brittle, it's around national security, right? And it is around protecting America in the world and working with your allies and keeping your enemies at arm's length on matters of national security. Now, Trump has compromised that. And that plays to Republican, I was going to say paranoia, that's not the right word, but this does set Trump offside with his own national security establishment, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, look, this has been a difficult thing for the Republican Party in general. The Republican Party, tends to take a really tough view on Russia, a very fairly hawkish view on Russia. And the bulk of the party is still there. Now, they've been trying to carve out space for the Trump administration to operate. What many of them are saying, in order to kind of, again, toe this line and thread the needle, really, and find a middle ground, is saying, look, the White House is denying the reports. I've learned my lesson in past, episodes not to necessarily trust the news just at the outset, so I want to understand what's going on here. But they're doing it with a very different tone. They're demanding answers from the White House, saying they want a reckoning, saying they want a laying out of the facts, wanting a fuller explanation than the White House has given in the few hours since we posted this report. And many people are saying more privately that this is a total mess.
Karun Demirjian, who's congressional reporter for the Washington Post. Earlier we spoke to their assistant editor, David Swerdlick. Just as an aside, we're constantly struck by the generosity of American media organisations, newspapers, television networks, whatever, who always say yes when we ask to talk to them, and we are very grateful for it. North Korea may be behind the WannaCry ransomware that's so far infected more than 200,000 computers in more than 150 countries around the world. The virus is similar to the one created by a North Korean group in 2015. And the connection comes as research discover new versions of WannaCry carrying hidden messages taunting authorities. New Zealand has remained largely unscathed, with no major institutions or organisations affected. Zach Fleming asked Nushin Shabab, a senior security researcher at cybersecurity company Kaspersky, why that is.
Australia was among the highest rates of ransomware last year, but this time I think maybe people are more concerned about security, and they take security more seriously.
So you're saying that it has nothing to do with our, I guess, geographical location, but perhaps New Zealanders and Australians might be more aware of security and more likely to upgrade and patch their systems?
Yes, for sure. We didn't see anything, any particular focus among these attackers on any region. Geographically, all the people around the world have the same probability to get infected. But yes, for sure, it's the other reasons that we are not among the highest rates of infection.
Computer security experts have found portions of WannaCry's code were copied from a 2015 worm, believed to have been created by a government-sanctioned North Korean hacking group called Lazarus. Lazarus was the group behind the hacking of Sony in 2014 and is believed to have been involved in the hacking of Bangladesh Bank last year, where more than $100 million was stolen.
These things can be a false flag. We are still working on it. It just happened a few hours ago, and the researchers are working on it to have more clues and more indications of the connection between these two groups. As you know, Lazarus is a very big group. They work in different sections. They have been active for a couple of years now, and they started focusing on financial institutions eventually, and now it can be possible that they are behind this ransomware attack.
But it could be months before any connection is confirmed.
All the security researchers around the world are working day and night. Every minute we found new things about this group.
New updated versions of the WannaCry ransomware worm are still being identified. Researchers say anyone with a Windows computer should run updates to be safe. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
21 minutes past 6. A cornerstone investor in a multi-million-dollar plan to revitalise the Whanganui port says a proposed ferry service is putting the whole project in jeopardy. The boat builder Q West says Midwest Ferries is piggybacking on a viable plan and risks scuttling attempts to get government funding. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin has been dockside.
The Whanganui port has seen better days. Once a bustling hub, it is now little more than a collection of scruffy sheds, and its 3 wharves are in desperate need of some TLC. The city bought back the port from a private owner about 10 years ago and has already invested $1.5 million in Wharf 1. The Mayor, Hamish McDougall, has exciting plans for the area.
The proposal is to take those silos down, to move one of our major industries, Q West, which is a boat builder, into the centre of the port. Then you've also got a enhancement of the recreational boating ramp, which is heavily used by Manawatu and Whanganui and Rupehu.
The government coughed up $500,000 for the port master plan as part of its Accelerate 25 regional growth strategy. It's expected to contribute about a third of the cost of the $10 million project if it comes to fruition. The Midwest Ferries proposal for a daily freight service between Whanganui and Motueka is not included in the plan, but Mr McDougall says it could be added if it proves its case. The owner of Key West, Miles Fothergill, says talk of a ferry service is an unnecessary distraction.
Quite frankly, it's clouding the whole port revitalisation program, and they are pushing to get the ferry proposal included in that. And that's problematic because it's not a complete business plan they have or feasibility study. It's only a partial one.
Mr Fothergill says without a sound business case, the ferry proposal is just in the way.
My concern, I've been quite vocal about it, is that if that's not done properly, if that's done half-baked, then the government and local government council could look at this and effectively say, well, it's just not going to fly and jeopardise the rest of it.
Miles Fothergill says the size of the proposed ferry would require fundamental changes to the course of the river and its entrance and dredging out at sea. Whanganui businessman Neville Johnson is behind Midwest Ferries, and he's been exploring the concept for about 7 years. He's got bold plans for a $55 million redevelopment of the port, with a freight service starting in 3 to 4 years' time, joined later by a passenger service. Mr Johnson says it's financially viable if berthage fees are waived, and dredging the infamous Whanganui bar doesn't faze him either.
We have to dredge the bar down to 7 metres low tide, okay, and at that the swell and problems with the bar, as everyone keeps talking about, virtually disappear. It was dredged down to 7 metres successfully, as I say, back in 1990, so it's not as though we're just sort of taking advice on this. It has been done.
Mr Johnson says Key West's reservations are a surprise to him.
Well, it's all news to me. I haven't heard anything like that before. I thought in the discussions I've had with Miles that we were getting on extremely well, looking at both our ventures, that it could be accommodated quite well.
Does it concern you at all?
No.
You think you'll work it?
Oh yeah, we'll work around that, no problem, I'm sure.
The council has asked to see more information from Midwest Ferries before it presents its business case to the government. For Checkpoint, Ko Robin Martin Taney.
6:25. A man who served time in prison for fraud says he's incredibly grateful for being given another chance in employment upon release. In Christchurch this morning, the Corrections Minister, Louise Upston, hosted the second in a series of breakfasts with employers, encouraging them to take on former offenders. Our reporter Maya Burry was there.
Hayden Doig told employers at the event his life spiralled downwards after his sister died when he was a teenager.
I used drugs as a way to cope. Back then, I didn't really think it was a problem. Last year, it took over my life. I had a good job working as a manager for another company, and I ended up doing fraud-style charges towards that company. So yeah, I lost my job, and it put a setback on my life, and I had to deal with that, so I was sent to prison for that.
Doig says he is now drug-free and has his life back on track. He says he's thankful his new employer, Hamish Wright, who is the Managing Director of Construction Contracting Limited in Christchurch, gave him a chance.
All I can say, if I had more people like Hamish, I wouldn't have got a job. Because of my charges, I just wouldn't have. No one would have gave me a chance, but because Hamish did, I'm very appreciative for it.
Hamish Wright says he was slightly sceptical of taking on someone with a conviction at first, but Doig has proved his worth to the company.
He's been with us now for 4 months. He's been a fantastic worker. Is probably more skilled than half of the guys that we've got in the positions at the moment. We've been pleasantly surprised every sort of day, and it's fantastic.
Mr. Wright says he would consider taking on more offenders if they have the right skills.
They've still got to be pitted against people from the wider community, so it's not like there's a special favour going out to any of the released to work prisoners, but more often than not they've got something to prove, and it's their last chance to actually do it, so they put more effort in, and you don't see them not turning up on a Friday morning or a Monday morning, and they'll work the extra hours and do those extra bits and pieces.
About 70 employers turned up to this morning's breakfast. A similar event was held in Hamilton last month. The Corrections Minister, Louise Upston, says about 100 businesses have already signed up to the initiative, but more need to get on board. She says people are less likely to reoffend if they have a stable job.
The stability, the ability to earn an income, the ability to get a second chance, and to be around a group of people that believe in you is really important in terms of supporting them in their future.
When asked whether government agencies are giving offenders a chance at employment, Ms Upston had this to say.
I'm not aware of how many examples there are, but absolutely I'd be encouraging the same. At the end of the day, a job is a job, and that is an opportunity for a very different future.
Amanda Wallace is an employment placement coordinator for the Corrections Department. Ms Wallace says some industries are more open to hiring offenders than others, but it wants to widen that group.
Probably with Christchurch at the moment and the way it is, so there's construction is probably our biggest one, just with the work that's available, but I think probably retail might be the hardest, and that could just be part of the stigma, but we're trying to break that down so we can get more people in there.
George Murray served 5 months home detention on a raft of charges, including breaching bail conditions and burglary. He now has a job with a wholesale vegetable company and says the work has given him a purpose.
While I live with my guilt every day for my past actions, I'm grateful that an employer through this program has given me a chance to contribute positively again towards society and not be a cost to society.
The next employers' breakfast is being held in Wellington next month. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Maya Burry.
29 minutes past 6, just before we go, some feedback, and thank you for it. Tens of thousands of so-called affordable houses to be built in Auckland. I have two questions. How will this opportunity to lead the world in the zero net carbon by 2050 goal be integrated into the public think big program? What proportion could be tiny houses integrated into new urban infilling arrangements at 1/10 the cost, and kicking off the kind of resilience sector that could inspire the young and even sustainable, ethical and cultural tourism? That's Alistair from Kapiti. No wonder Amy Adams doesn't specify affordable houses in Hobsonville. What a joke. We are above average income and couldn't buy there, says Emily. And a postgraduate student, Brendan Blue, writes in, good to hear the coverage of student allowances. Let's not forget that one of the first things this government did when they came to power was cut student allowances entirely for those studying postgraduate degrees. Not entirely sure what the justification for this was. Disincentivising higher education seems like a strange step to take. Thank you, Brendan, and thank you for all your feedback. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News, it's headlines at 6:30. A woman raped by the serial attacker Malcolm Rewa says it's a really big deal that he may be charged again with murdering Susan Burdett. The Social Housing Minister says a plan to build 34,000 new houses over the next 10 years in Auckland is as fast as the market can handle. Opposition parties are calling for anyone who lost their job at the Transport Ministry after raising concerns about the convicted fraudster Joanne Harrison to be compensated. Senior figures in the White House are flatly rejecting media allegations Donald Trump revealed classified intelligence about Islamic State to the Russian Foreign Minister. A private tertiary institute that used to have 1,000 foreign students has lost its registration. A Central Otago farm worker has serious leg injuries after being trapped in a hay baler. And Littleton Port is preparing to shut down this evening in